After the eldest son of the Bernard family went missing, I found an Omega in the cornfield. I took him home, treated his wounds, and once he recovered, he insisted on devoting himself to me. The night we crawled under the covers together, I stared shyly at his handsome face. They say you can get pregnant just by sleeping together. We aren't married yet. Wouldn't this be bad? But if you do get pregnant, I'll definitely take responsibility. An Enigma. What's that? Can it carry a baby too? Yes, but the one on top. Huh? Today, the Bernard family, the wealthiest real estate tycoons, dominated the headlines. Shocking scandal in the Bernard family. Youngest son elopes with future sister-in-law. Eldest son Carlos in tragic car crash while chasing his runaway bride. Missing for a week, fate unknown. Meanwhile, in a cornfield in a remote small town, Arnold stared intently at the man collapsed over the crushed corn stalks, his pupils shrinking sharply. The heart in his chest hammered like a lit firework, thumping so hard it threatened to shatter his ribs. This was definitely an Omega. His face was visually striking, pale, handsome, with a weak, rosy flush at the corners of his eyes. Arnold swallowed hard, rolled up his sleeves, and went to pick him up. 3 seconds later, Arnold's face turned purple, veins throbbing wildly at his temples. This pretty Omega was as heavy as a bull. Arnold practically dug 2 craters into the mud with his feet before he managed to drag and haul this mountain of pretty meat back home. In the cramped, dirt-walled house, the village chief puffed away on his dry tobacco pipe, exhaling pale blue smoke that circled above the hulking Omega. Probably a soldier who ran away from a war in the neighboring village. Chief, Arnold's eye twitched. The war was last year. Besides, you can tell from these clothes he's from the city. The chief tapped his pipe against the sole of his shoe and patted Arnold's mud-caked shoulder. Arnold, keep him here for now. I'll go ask around. Arnold's ears turned a bizarre shade of red, his fingers twisting his shirt hem. Chief, an Alpha, and Hez an Omega. 2 single men all alone in a house. Isn't that a bad idea? The chief eyed Arnold's sturdy arms, then took a long look at the giant Omega taking up the entire wooden bed. A knowing smile played on his lips. Who's gonna pin down who is anybody's guess? What are you worrying about? Arnold, an orphan abandoned at the village entrance at age 6, always wore a black stone around his neck. Right now, that black stone swayed mid-air as he brought over a bowl of porridge. The Omega woke up with a handsome but blank expression, his gaze glued to that black stone, eyes darting back and forth between the stone and Arnold's flushed cheeks. Arnold grew stiff under the intense stare, his breathing quickening. Even though he was in his own mud house, he somehow felt the awkwardness of being dragged onto a blind date by a horde of nosy aunts. For the sake of Alpha-Omega propriety, Arnold resolutely set up a pallet on the floor. He dug out his life savings sewn into his underwear to pay for the medical treatment of this Omega, whom he had named Ken. Whenever Ken drank his medicine, his pale lips would move incessantly, like a monk chanting endlessly. Arnold, once my wounds heal and I remember where my home is, I'll definitely take you back with me. I'll drown you in gold bars to repay you. I have a feeling I must be a ridiculously wealthy young master. Arnold silently rolled his eyes and pulled his ragged cotton quilt over his head. City folks sure dared to dream. An old farmer like him only dared to dream about the family's old sow having piglets. However, the most critical wound on Ken's body was a deep, chilling gash on the gland at the back of his neck. This caused his pheromones to spiral out of control. When Arnold approached that damaged gland with a cotton swab, his fingertips trembling slightly, boom! In the cramped mud house, the air was instantly distorted by intense heat. Visible dark red ripples erupted outwards in a frantic circular shockwave, with Ken's nape at the epicenter. Arnold's breath was instantly stolen by this inescapable domination. His knees gave out uncontrollably, and he crashed heavily onto the wooden floor. His eyes stung bright red from the surging dark red light and shadows all around him, and physiological tears poured out like a broken dam. Weren't Omegas supposed to be fragrant, soft, and surrounded by pink bubbles? Why did Ken's pheromones feel like a red-hot chainsaw hacking directly into his skull? After being blinded for the nth time by this distorted space of scorching dark red heat, Arnold pushed his eyes open through his tears and asked through gritted teeth, "Ken, what kind of lethal weapon is your pheromone?" Amidst the chaotic, dark red shadows, Ken blinked his innocent eyes, his towering frame shrinking back in grievance. The red glow around him flickered guiltily in tandem. I think it's red chili pepper. Do you not like it? Arnold knelt on the ground, wiping away the tears smearing his face. Inside this fiery red barrier, his stomach let out a deafening rumble. No, Arnold sniffled, staring intently at the red ripples. It just stings my eyes. But right now, I could demolish 3 massive bowls of white rice. The old village chief pushed open the broken half door, dropping his tobacco pipe in the mud out of shock. In less than a month, the pretty mountain of meat they had dragged back from the brink of death was now striding robustly around the yard, chopping wood with his bare hands. Look! Arnold grabbed Ken's bulging muscles with both hands, spinning him around in a full circle as if showing off his prize-winning pig ready for the New Year's market. Look at these muscles, this physique. The medicine wasn't a waste. Look how solid he grew. The corner of Ken's handsome mouth twitched slightly, but his towering body was as docile as a sheep, letting the alpha, who was half a head shorter, maneuver him at will. The old village chief dragged Arnold into the corner, his beard trembling with anger. He picked up his pipe and knocked it hard against Arnold's forehead. Where did you get the money for medicine? That was your savings to get a wife. You foolish boy. The chasing game in the yard came to an abrupt halt. A tall, imposing shadow loomed over them. Ken stood squarely in front of Arnold like a wall of size. That money, was it only meant for a future wife? Ken lowered his head, his deep, dark eyes locking onto Arnold with irresistible magnetism. Don't listen to his nonsense. I spent the money willingly. Arnold poked his head out from behind the broad back, his tongue tying in knots. Before he could finish, a large, warm hand seized the initiative, gripping his wrist like an iron vice with astonishing strength. Then I'll be your wife. Ken's voice was deep, dropping with enough weight to leave a crater. The old village chief slapped his thigh, immediately offering to officiate the wedding. No. I didn't say I was marrying anyone. What's the rush? Arnold's neck flushed completely red as he struggled to pull his hand back. The moment the words left his mouth, Ken's tall frame went rigid. The domination that had just commanded the space instantly collapsed. In the air around him, the faintly flowing dark red heat waves withered in a flash, turning into flickering, dim sparks. He lowered his strikingly handsome face, letting a fragile blush form at the corners of his eyes. I understand. No one wants an Omega with an unknown past. Ken's broad shoulders trembled violently, his long fingers covering his cheeks. The moment my pheromones leak, the light around me turns into a scorching furnace, distorted and blinding. You don't like it at all. I never said I didn't like it. Watching this giant active volcano curl up in grievance, Arnold's alpha protective instincts instantly overrode his reason. He scrambled forward and threw his arms around Ken's muscular waist. I'll marry you, I will. That red glow looks warm. It really works up an appetite. Really? Ken lifted his head instantly. I swear, I never lie. Ken's lips curled into a victorious smirk. His broad, stubbly chin rubbed aggressively against the crook of Arnold's neck. Arnold, you are such a good person. While Arnold was blushing and scratching his head, his heart pounding like a drum from the good guy card, Ken had already straightened up without a hint of hesitation. He bypassed the still dazed Arnold and grasped the village chief's hand with precision. Chief, where were we? Tomorrow is a good day, right? Arnold froze in place, a question mark slowly forming above his head. Who was the real fool here? The wedding schedule was finalized at light speed, driven by the instant mutual agreement of the two outsiders. Stone, now that you've met a sturdy, fine young man like Ken, you should marry him off sooner rather than later. The village chief sighed while flipping through the almanac. Arnold's eyelids twitched wildly. Marry him off? Arnold stared intently at Ken, who was effortlessly crushing walnuts with one hand in the yard. His Adam's apple bobbed with difficulty. He grabbed the village chief by the collar, his fingertips trembling slightly. Tell me the truth, do you think? When we get to bed, I can pin him down? The village chief remained silent for a full 10 seconds, blew out a thick ring of smoke, and looked at him with profound pity. Well, the night before the wedding, the cramped, dirt-walled house was dead silent. Arnold lay on the pallet, his stiff back pressed firmly against the cold, hard ground. His eyes were wide as saucers in the dark, and his chest felt as if a maddened wild rabbit was trapped inside, ramming his ribs until they ached. Can't sleep? A very soft creak of wood came from the bed above. Ken's hoarse voice, like a barbed hook, drilled straight into Arnold's ears along with the night breeze. In the air, that familiar dark red ripple began to silently awaken, creeping down the edge of the bed toward the floor like an invisible vine. Arnold shuddered, swallowing nervously. "I'm thirsty, just getting up for some water." He scrambled up from the pallet on all fours, but his legs were only halfway straight when, thud. In the darkness, a large hand with distinct knuckles and bulging veins shot out, clamping down on Arnold's solid upper arm with absolute precision. An inescapable, monstrous strength struck him. Before Arnold could even let out a gasp, he was plucked into the air like a rag doll and crashed heavily into a broad, scalding, rock-hard embrace. What kind of Omega wife had such terrifying grip strength, tossing an alpha around one-handed like a baby chick? Before Arnold could struggle, Ken's heavy head dropped onto his right shoulder with an aggressive, inescapable weight. The room was instantly cloaked in a dense, dark red light. It was the physical manifestation of Ken's uncontrolled pheromones. The temperature in the room skyrocketed. Everything in sight, shadows and light, twisted and shuddered frantically as if roasted by a raging fire. Ken's scorching breath sprayed unhindered against Arnold's sensitive ear, causing that small patch of skin to engorge and turn fiercely red instantly. The dark red shadows danced eerily around their overlapping faces. Ken tightened the iron arm banded around Arnold's waist. In the heat-distorted air, his deep voice carried a dangerous, intoxicating magnetism. "Arnold, if you're thirsty, I have a very quick way to quench your thirst. Want to try?" Arnold had a rough idea of what Ken meant. In those trashy romance novels he had read, the plot clearly stated, when the protagonist was thirsty and aching all over, all they had to do was nibble on each other in a dark room, pull the covers over their heads, sleep, and it cured everything. But this rickety wooden bed was simply too small. To avoid crowding this giant Buddha, Arnold pressed himself flat like a mural, half his body hanging off the edge of the bed. "I heard that if two people sleep in the same bed, they can get pregnant. We're not doing the deed until tomorrow. Is it really okay to do this today?" Arnold swallowed, nervously clutching the edge of the quilt, muttering softly, "But if you do get pregnant, I'll definitely take responsibility." In the dark, Ken's low laughter shook the wooden boards. "Idiot, you don't get pregnant just by hiding under the covers. Besides, we're getting married tomorrow." Ken paused, those dark eyes hidden in the shadows locking onto Arnold's silhouette. "Also, to be honest, I'm an enigma." "What? Can you carry a baby too?" "I can." With that hoarse declaration, Ken's broad, scalding hand grabbed Arnold's wrist and, with inescapable momentum, guided it straight down. The moment he made contact, Arnold's mind buzzed, and his face exploded into a violent blush. He jerked his hand back as if burned by a branding iron, glancing at his own under the moonlight. His pupils quaked violently as he descended into deep self-doubt. He knew this pretty Omega was tall and incredibly strong, but this size was way too out of bounds, wasn't it? Scared? Ken tightened his grip on that stiff waist, his iron arm securing the man firmly in his embrace to prevent an escape. A dangerous, dark gleam flashed in his eyes. "Arnold, I need to make one thing clear to you. An enigma can mark any gender, just like an alpha marks an omega." "Huh?" Which means, I can make you pregnant. "Huh?" After an entire night of agonizing shock and mental gymnastics, Arnold finally managed to swallow the hardcore reality that his fragrant wife had become a husband. Fortunately, Ken promised that once they stepped outside that door, Arnold would still be the majestic groom. With that thought, Arnold finally felt somewhat at peace. The next day, the tedious wedding rituals were fast-forwarded. The stiff white shirt, the rowdy youngsters cheering, the village chief downing glass after glass with a glowing red face. The scenes flashed by. It wasn't until the evening sky turned the color of sunset that Arnold, rubbing his dizzy head, was carried home by the villagers and pushed open the wooden door to the bridal chamber. The door hinges had barely turned halfway when a terrifyingly oppressive wave of heat smashed into Arnold's face. The air in the room distorted like mirages in a severe desert drought. Dense, dark red particles collided and exploded frantically in midair. Arnold snapped back to his senses, the heat instantly sobering him up. He stumbled forward. In the center of the red glow, Ken's towering body was curled up, his pale face flushed with an alarming crimson. Even the surrounding air shuddered and warped under his rapid, heavy breathing. "Ken, are you okay? Is your wound acting up? Why is your face so red?" "Hubby, you're here." Ken abruptly lifted his gaze. Thick, dark red halos churned in those eyes. His body temperature felt like a red-hot branding iron as he grabbed Arnold, who was crouching by the bed, and pulled him fiercely into his arms, keeping him in place. Yeah, I'm here, wifey." Enveloped by that intense heat, Arnold's face instantly burned hot too. "Hubby, I think my rut has started." "Ah. Then, let's hurry to the clinic for a shot." Ken straightened up slightly. His scalding lips brushed lightly against Arnold's bright red earlobe, and the dark red particles manifested into physical vines, instantly wrapping around Arnold's neck. "No need. You just need to kiss me." "Really?" Looking at that handsome face, which seemed somehow alluring under the dark red glow, and those blinking, innocent eyes, Arnold was deeply moved. An enigma was so easy to take care of, he didn't even need a shot during his rut. He closed his eyes completely off guard, puckered his lips like a duck, and leaned in, completely missing the aggressive, triumphant smirk that tugged at the corners of the other man's mouth. That single kiss swallowed him whole for 7 days. For those 7 days, the shade under the big tree at the village entrance was packed. Did you hear? Stone and his new spouse haven't stepped out for 7 days. Their love is as solid as gold. But recently, there's been this scorching heat in the village. Who's boiling a giant vat of chili oil? Those dark red heat waves are seeping right out of Stone's doorframe, and it smells surprisingly good. After 7 consecutive days and nights of frantic bombardment, the dark red high temperatures inside the room finally receded on the morning of the 8th day. Arnold lay paralyzed on the bed like a puddle of mud. The skin exposed outside the covers was stamped with a dense, shocking array of red marks. Meanwhile, the fragile, unable to care for himself, Ken was now brimming with energy, striding briskly around the bed as he packed a bag. "Hubby, I might have to go on a long trip soon. Be good and wait for me at home." Arnold struggled to roll his eyes, his voice as raspy as if he had swallowed sandpaper. "Where are you going? Did you remember something?" Ken's hands paused. He deliberately sat back on the edge of the bed, let out a sigh, and his deep gaze licked over Arnold with tangible magnetism. "Actually, I recovered my memory on the 2nd day of our marriage." "Then why didn't you say so sooner?" Ken leaned in and planted a heavy kiss on the corner of Arnold's ravaged mouth, his Adam's apple bobbing with lingering desire, his eyes sticky with affection. "I couldn't help it. My hubby is too charming and I was in my rut. How could I control myself?" Arnold shuddered, wrapping the quilt tightly around himself like a frightened quail. How had he not noticed before that this guy was such a smooth talker? Was all that innocent, pure behavior just an act? Ken continued brainwashing him. "The journey this time is a bit far, and your body hasn't fully recovered from being exhausted. Ill head back first. And when you're better ill..." Arnold's mental radar instantly blared alarms, extracting the core information with precision. He recovered his memory without saying a word, devoured him completely for 7 straight days, and now he was dusting off his pants to leave without taking him along? This was clearly abandoning his husband right after the wedding. "No way!" Arnold suddenly erupted with a dying burst of energy. He grabbed the hem of Ken's shirt tightly and roared through gritted teeth. "I'm going with you." 3 bulging snakeskin woven bags bounced violently on the broken donkey cart. The fading image of the village chief wiping away tears in the blowing yellow dust was rapidly stretched and left behind. With the piercing shriek of a train whistle, the scene abruptly cut to a cramped, noisy green carriage. "My family is just average. My parents are alive, and we run a small company." The man who called himself Carlos leaned against the stiff seatback. His long legs were awkwardly crossed with nowhere to go. Under the flickering carriage lights, his deep-set eyes conveyed a sense of impoverished sincerity. Arnold hugged the snakeskin bag tightly, staring at that visually striking, handsome face, his eyes filled with pure innocence. "That's nice." Carlos chuckled softly, his hot palm ruffling Arnold's hair. However, this impoverished filter was completely shattered a few hours later. Glass facades piercing the clouds reflected the blinding cold light of the city. Arnold, looking like a groundhog that had stumbled into a steel forest, was held by the collar with one hand by Carlos on the side of the road. Less than 10 minutes after a coin dropped into the payphone, an obscenely extravagant, black stretched limousine with paint so polished it could act as a mirror glided silently to a halt right at their feet like a phantom. The window rolled down silently, and a driver in white gloves bowed slightly. Young master. Arnold's jaw practically hit the curb. Before he could figure out which deity this young master referred to, a broad hand clamped precisely onto the back of his neck. He was unceremoniously stuffed into the leather back seat like a weightless piece of luggage. To the main estate. Carlos stepped in with his long legs, and the door slammed shut, instantly isolating them from the city's noise. Outside the window, the winding mountain road blurred into distorted shadows. The car finally came to a steady stop in front of a majestic villa that looked like a mid-mountain fortress. Before the carved iron gates, an impeccably groomed elderly man in a tailored tuxedo had been waiting for quite some time. Arnold swallowed, clutching tightly to the hem of Carlos' shirt, and whispered in awe, "Is this our dad?" Hez really going strong for his age. The corner of Carlos' mouth twitched imperceptibly. That's the butler. The subsequent tour of the estate utterly destroyed Arnold's worldview. The butler drove him around the yard in a golf cart for half an hour. Arnold looked at the vast empty land, not planted with green onions, but scattered with broken stones and weeds. Then he looked at the coffee table in the living room, which didn't even have a soft cushion and was just a massive tree stump. A deep sense of pity swelled in his eyes. Not even a vegetable patch, and the furniture was all chopped wood gathered from the mountains. With these conditions, it seemed they were truly so poor that all they had was lots of land. The next day, Carlos took Arnold to another minimally decorated, single-floor apartment. As soon as the door opened, a flamboyant beta youth with messy hair poked his head out. "Oh my God, cousin! You didn't die out there?" Carlos kept a cold face and threw the snakeskin bag right at him. "Say another word, and you can roll out of here." "Don't be mad." Mickey scrambled to catch the bag. His eyes shifted, locking onto Arnold standing behind him like radar. His eyes instantly lit up as he pointed wildly. "Bro, you don't need to introduce him. I know, this is my sister-in-law. My husband." Carlos' voice was hard as iron, devoid of any fluctuation. Clatter. The snakeskin bag slipped from Mickey's hands and hit the floor. The air in the room seemed to be instantly sucked away for a brief second. Mickey's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets. His gaze darted frantically back and forth between Arnold's robust chest muscles and Carlos' overwhelmingly domineering face. Finally, he drew a sharp breath, his voice cracking entirely. "No wonder you rejected the school's most beautiful Omega when she chased you. It turns out, bro, you're actually a bottom?" Boom! Before the words fully landed, the air in the living room violently twisted. With Carlos at the epicenter, a terrifying dark red wave of heat detonated instantly. The cool-toned light around them was violently stretched and distorted. Even the bangs on Mickey's forehead curled slightly from the extreme heat, manifesting out of thin air. Invisible sparks crackled furiously in the room, and the entire retina was overtaken by this inescapable dark red phenomenon. Veins bulged on Carlos' temples, his knuckles cracking as he strode forward on his long legs, ready to dismantle this death-seeking beta with his bare hands. Don't. The beating would be a waste of energy. Braving the blinding red light, Arnold lunged and tightly hugged Carlos' explosively powerful waist. His feet skidded across the smooth marble floor, leaving 2 distinct breaking marks. "The kid is still young. Let him call me whatever he wants." 10 minutes of physical communication later. By the guest bedroom door, Mickey, bruised and swollen like a plucked quail, squatted in the shadows, hugging his knees and shivering. Carlos slowly and methodically smoothed out his slightly wrinkled cuffs. The moment he turned to face Arnold, the raging dark red heat waves receded like a tide without a trace, replaced by a spine-tingling sticky tenderness. "I'm heading back to the company today. I'll be very busy recently. You stay with this trash for the next 2 days. If you don't understand something, ask him." Carlos leaned down slightly, his searing lips leaving a highly possessive kiss on Arnold's earlobe, chuckling hoarsely. "So cute." From the corner came Mickey's fearless ew, which was immediately silenced by Carlos pinning him to the wall with a razor-sharp glare. Before leaving, those long, articulated fingers lifted the black stone necklace around Arnold's neck. "I'll take this stone and help you find your relatives." Carlos gripped the stone, which still carried the Omega's body heat, gave him a deep look, and pushed the door open to leave. Arnold touched his empty collarbone, looking at the heavy security door, and curled his lips. City folks sure love to make a fuss. Where could they possibly find relatives with a broken stone necklace? For the next half-month or so, Arnold's life was brutally split into two halves. During the day, he followed Mickey around idly, but at night, in a state between sleep and wakefulness, he could feel a tall, chilling body slipping under the covers. Carlos descended punctually every night, like an enchanting spirit draining his energy. But every time Arnold was kissed into a dizzy stupor and getting ready for the main event, he would be lulled into a deep sleep by that reassuring, subtle warmth. If it weren't for Mickey sitting in the living room with two dark circles under his eyes bearing witness, Arnold would genuinely have thought he was being haunted by some stunningly beautiful male ghost. Determined to earn money to support the family sooner, Arnold embarked on a grueling career of part-time jobs. Amid Mickey's tragic wails, he successfully maneuvered himself into becoming the bar's sole morning shift cleaning master. Every day, Mickey acted like a sneaky underground spy, escorting him to and from work, terrified that his older brother would find out he had sold his sister-in-law to a bar. However, these peaceful days did not last long. Carlos disappeared. On the phone, there was always a dismissive very busy. Even the suggestion to officially register their marriage was impatiently blocked with a wait until you find your family. It wasn't until Mickey let it slip that Arnold learned Carlos had personally gone south to pick someone up. Who could be more important than getting legally married? In front of the empty bar counter, a few bored co-workers were huddled together gossiping. Massive T, the eldest son of the Bernard family, found his runaway fiancée. Tick, what about the little alpha has been hiding in his apartment? I heard he pampers him to the extreme. What do you know? The latest paparazzi shots show that the little alpha and the fiancé look exactly the same. The young master is playing the substitute game. Tisk tisk, how tragic. Being treated as a substitute for the true love without even knowing it. Arnold's hand, which was wiping a glass, suddenly froze. The barren wasteland in his heart was instantly overgrown with thorny weeds. He involuntarily leaned closer. I have a high-def photo. A coworker raised his phone excitedly. Arnold's eyes fell on the screen, and his brain buzzed as if struck squarely by a hammer. In the photo, that tall man with the doting gaze, he would recognize him even if he turned to ash. It was Carlos. And the alpha hanging onto Carlos like a koala, cheeks flushed, looked exactly like him. The coworker turned his head, saw Arnold's deathly pale face, and gasped, "Oh my gosh. Arnold, you and this little alpha look like identical twins." Those words were like a sharp blade, completely popping Arnold's final illusion of self-deception. His name was Carlos. He had a fiancée who looked just like him. He refused to get the marriage license. He went to pick someone up. It all lined up perfectly. Arnold froze in place, every breath carrying a metallic taste. Having grown up eating scraps from 100 different households, he thought he finally had a home. But it turned out, he was just a stand-in who didn't even deserve a marriage certificate. A wicked fire shot straight to the top of his skull. He wiped his red-rimmed eyes and stormed right into the boss office to ask for time off. As soon as the boss heard he was going to catch a cheater, he approved the leave without a second thought, and even offered to sponsor a self-defense weapon. Arnold hailed a cab with murderous intent, heading straight for the mid-mountain estate. He had even mentally rehearsed 108 different ways to slap him and drafted the most heartless dialogue. The only thing he hadn't calculated was, "That'll be 300, please." The cab driver pressed the meter. Arnold patted all his pockets, staring at the crumpled $50 bill in his palm. His arrogant flames of catching a cheater were instantly extinguished, replaced by an embarrassment so profound he wished he could sink into the floor. In the end, it was the butler, arriving in a hurry on the reception golf cart, who smiled and paid the $250 difference for the runaway young madam. On the golf cart, Arnold was sitting on pins and needles. "Butler, can you go faster?" "I'm in a rush." The butler glanced at him and didn't speed up. Figuring his dignity was already entirely lost, Arnold took a deep breath and started spouting nonsense. "Impregnant. I want to give Carlos a surprise." The butler's cloudy old eyes suddenly burst with brilliant light. Stomping on the gas pedal, the golf cart practically drifted up the winding mountain road with sound effects. "The young master is in the study on the second floor. Go upstairs and take a right." The butler's excited, voice-cracking shout echoed in the wind. Arnold rushed up to the second floor, taking the steps two at a time, but abruptly stopped in his tracks before the half-open door to the study. Inside, the sound of Carlos arguing with his father drifted out clearly. "You risked your life to find him, so what does that previous wedding count for?" This was the furious voice of the old chairman. "What does it matter if it counts or not? You know full well I have no feelings for him." Carlos' cold, hard voice dumped down like a basin of ice water. "That wedding was just a formality anyway. We didn't get a license." Arnold's nails dug fiercely into his palms, his eyes stinging with pain. No feelings, no license, just a formality. So, those 7 days and nights of intimate friction, those scorching pheromones, it was all just because of this face? Now that he's back, proceed with the original marriage agreement. "Their family will definitely agree," Carlos' voice continued. "So that was why he wouldn't get a license, so he could kick him to the curb at any time to make room for the real deal. Fine, fine. Have it your way." Wait a minute. Carlos' voice suddenly paused in the study, taking on an extremely sharp trace of suspicion. "I think I smell." The heavy mahogany door was violently shoved open. Arnold, his red-rimmed eyes glaring dead at the stunned Carlos inside, raised his sturdy arm high, bringing a gust of wind with it. Smack! A crisp, resounding slap exploded in the study. The strength was so great it seemed to ripple the air. A few physiological tears caught the cold light of the chandelier in midair, bursting from his eyes alongside the loud slap. "You liar! You scumbag!" Arnold roared, turned, and bolted. Snapping back to reality with a bright red handprint on his face, Carlos clutched his cheek and gave chase with his long legs. "Arnold, listen to me. It's not what you think." Classic scumbag dialogue. Arnold gritted his teeth. His sturdy, long legs, tempered by years of racing wild boars on farm ridges, pumped so fast they became a blur. So what if he was an enigma? When it came to outdoor obstacle running, this pampered young master would have to eat an old farmer's dust. "Somebody? Stop him!" "Butler, close the gates!" Carlos' exasperated roars echoed down the hallway. Several beta servants rushing forward were scattered like bowling pins by Arnold. At the main entrance, the butler spread his arms, pleading earnestly, "Oh my young madam, please slow down. Let's talk this out calmly. Be careful with the baby in your belly." Carlos, chasing from behind, slammed on the brakes, his handsome face filled with horror. "What baby? Where the hell did he get a baby?" Arnold seized the opportunity, grabbed the butler's sleeve, and let the tears fly. "Carlos devoured me completely, and now he turns around and wants to marry someone else. This two-timing heartbreaker is an absolute bastard." The moment the words fell, the butler's iron grip instantly turned to mush, and the whirring of the electric motor closing the main gates abruptly ceased. "Oh dear, I'm too old and useless. Can't hold on." The old butler exaggeratedly rubbed his eyes, looking at the remote control in his hand. "How come I can't even read the words clearly?" Arnold took the chance to execute a sliding tackle through the gap in the gates, diving headfirst into the vast night. Night fell deep within the rockery garden. Planning to find a dog hole for a smooth retreat, Arnold successfully got utterly lost in the wealthy family's maze-like garden. His money was gone, his wife ran off, and his hot-blooded devotion had been fed to the dogs. He huddled behind a freezing rockery stone, sniffing and weeping at the moon. Suddenly, the bushes next to him shook violently with rustling sounds. A massive German shepherd pounced over, wagging its tail excitedly. It was the big dog the butler had been walking the first time he came. "Shh! Blackie, why are you here?" Arnold clamped his hand firmly over the dog's mouth, desperately making empty promises. "I didn't bring any food today. If you stay perfectly quiet, I'll bring you a whole wild boar leg next time. How about that?" Blackie enthusiastically licked his face full of drool, seemingly agreeing to this shady deal. But a second later, a deep call came from the distance. "Blackie? Woof! Woof! A woof!" Blackie instantly tore up the treaty and frantically wagged its tail toward its master's direction. He couldn't hold the dog's mouth shut anymore. Arnold scrambled frantically to climb over to the other side of the rockery, but his foot slipped, and he slid straight down the stone wall, crashing flawlessly into a scalding hot chest waiting right at the bottom. Click! Under the moonlight, a cold silver gleam flashed. Heavy metal handcuffs instantly locked Arnold's wrists together, with the other end secured firmly to Carlos' own wrist. "Caught you, hubby!" Carlos panted slightly, a dangerous smirk hooking the corner of his mouth. Arnold thrashed wildly like a fish out of water, biting and smashing at the handcuffs. Carlos dodged his headbutt, backhandedly wrapping his still warm suit jacket around him until he was bundled up like a dumpling. His rough thumb pressed against Arnold's chafed red wrists. "You have so much energy. How about we save it for the bed? Unlock me. The butler has the key. If we don't go back, I'll sleep out here with you." The moment the words left his mouth, the temperature of the surrounding air skyrocketed. A blinding dark red halo detonated with Carlos at the center. The distorted heat waves instantly enveloped the two of them seamlessly. The lingering resonance from the previous temporary mark was ignited in a flash. Arnold's wildly struggling limbs uncontrollably went weak in the red glow. He gritted his teeth fiercely, forcing his rationality to pull the jacket tighter, still cursing incessantly. "I knew you were just lusting after my body. You, despicable." Carlos pressed forward relentlessly, his towering body completely pinning Arnold against the rough stone wall, leaving no avenue for retreat. Dark red, high-temperature particles danced and collided frantically at the tips of their noses. "This is my house. You could scream yourself hoarse and no one would come to help you." Carlos' voice was deadly hoarse within the heat wave, brimming with inescapable domination. "Besides, I'm lusting after my own husband's body. How is that despicable?" Seeing that handsome face draw closer and closer, aiming straight for his nape, Arnold was caught between embarrassment and fury, cursing aloud. "You rotten scumbag. You two-timing piece of trash. You couldn't catch your fiancé, so you found a stand-in to cheat me out of my body and my feelings. Now the real deal is back and you still won't let me go. You're not even human." The frantic dark red shadows around them suddenly stalled. Carlos' tall body froze in place. His gaze instantly turned exceedingly dangerous within the distorted red light. "Where did you hear that you're a stand-in?" As if he possessed a physiological disgust for the word stand-in, Carlos wasted no more words. He lowered his head and bit viciously straight through the gland at the back of Arnold's neck. Boom! An even fiercer dark red heat wave surged into the sky, instantly snapping the last string of reason in Arnold's brain. His head spun, his entire body losing all strength, and like a strand of overcooked noodle, he slumped powerlessly into that embrace full of extreme heat and danger, entirely at the other man's mercy. Arnold was hoisted upside down over a broad shoulder, his vision bouncing violently with the man's steady strides. Right inside this dizzying, washing machine-like perspective, a massive bombshell blew Arnold's neurons into fireworks. That white moonlight fiancé who ruled the gossip pages and made Carlos love him to death was actually his own long-lost younger brother. After recovering his memory, Carlos had connected the dots using the necklace and immediately thought of the long-lost eldest son of the Schmidt family. Upon returning to the city, he contacted the Schmidt family right away, only to discover that Derek had eloped with his younger brother Oscar. The Bernard parents were busy searching for people, and Derek's father was developing a mining area in the south, where the signal was too poor to reach him. After tremendous effort, Carlos finally managed to contact Derek's father, complete a paternity test, and was just about to come back to tell Arnold the good news, only to find that Arnold was harder to catch than a wild monkey. "Then what's with that photo? I don't believe you have no feelings for him." Arnold slapped two loud handprints onto Carlos, solid back in anger. Carlos suddenly hoisted the man on his shoulder higher and sneered. A dark gleam of disgust flashed in his eyes. "Feelings? For that hypocrite who acts decent on the outside but is dark and twisted on the inside. Those old fogies insisted on locking me and him together, and the result? The two of them eloped and left me to take the blame alone. Then what do you like about me? Isn't it because of this face?" Arnold's eyes reddened, his fingers gripping the man's shirt tightly. Carlos suddenly stopped walking. The cold light from the street lamp hit his deep brow bone, carving out a sharp shadow with highly contrasted angles. "You look nothing like him. Arnold is Arnold. One of a kind. As for why I like you," the villa's main hall was brilliantly lit. Before seeing the person, old Bernard's thunderous roar echoed out, "Knocking someone up before you're even married. You haven't learned a single bit of our family's fine virtues. When that bastard gets back, I'm going to break his legs." In the shadows of the hallway, Carlos' towering figure instantly shrank a few inches. He expertly nuzzled his stubbly head into the crook of Arnold's neck, acting spoiled with the most ferocious physique. "Wifey, When I get beaten up in a minute, you have to protect me. Tisk. Eyesore. A cold voice cut in. Arnold looked over Carlos' shoulder and met a face as exquisitely crafted and cold as a fine scroll painting. Derek raised an eyebrow, and the ice in his eyes melted instantly upon seeing Arnold. Brother, stop feeding the mosquitoes with this idiot. Mom and Dad are waiting anxiously. The bond of kinship was like an invisible electric current. Arnold instinctively reached out his left hand, but it was jerked back mid-air. Click! The silver handcuffs reflected a cold metallic glint under the lights. On his right side, Carlos gripped his wrist like a ravenous wolf protecting its food, the air around him beginning to faintly warp. The two men traded glances across Arnold, their gazes clashing in mid-air with crackling sparks. Ultimately, the two reached a bizarre consensus, lifting Arnold by the arms from the left and right like a prisoner and hauling him into the grand hall. The grand family reunion concluded amidst incredibly dramatic push and pull dynamics. To calm his roller coaster emotions, Arnold decided to stay in the guest room temporarily. The two patriarchs were on high alert, issuing a strict order of absolute premarital abstinence, sleep in separate rooms. Late at night, the guest room lock gave a very faint click. A tall, dark silhouette slipped into the room like an agile panther, locked the door, and got onto the bed in one fluid, seamless motion. A scalding body instantly pinned Arnold firmly against the soft mattress, searing lips precisely capturing his breath. In the dark, the air suddenly twisted and boiled. Dark red halos climbed wildly along the bed curtains like living vines, locking the two men in an inescapable domain of high heat that could scorch the very retinas. "Hubby, did you miss me?" Carlos' hoarse voice exploded by his ear. "Everything that happened tonight. I'm not dreaming, am I?" A physiological blush spread from the corners of Arnold's eyes. "Idiot. Of course it's real." Carlos' long fingers delivered a punishing flick to his forehead, dangerous dark red lights flickering in his eyes. "However, there is one thing that's fake." "What is it?" "The pregnancy." The frenzied dark red heat waves roared in, swallowing his rationality. Arnold's pupils quaked as he struggled to escape. Dad said no. Shh. Carlos used one hand to pin those flailing wrists firmly against the pillow. Within the heat-distorted shadows, the curve of his lips was as wickedly evil as a life-reaping demon. "Don't worry, hubby. With my abilities, this fake thing will become real very soon." Extra chapter. In the back alley of a neon-lit bar where lights and shadows were sliced into fragmented pieces, Carlos, having heard the disastrous news of the arranged marriage, arrived with a dark face to meet Derek, who looked even more like a widower than he did. The usually suit-clad hypocrite now had his tie thrown wide open and his hair ruffled into a bird's nest. "Either find my brother, or we make do with each other." Derek downed an entire bottle of hard liquor, so drunk he couldn't recognize his own mother. He grabbed Carlos' collar and laughed foolishly. "Oscar, how did you get so tall? Let's elope. The thought of marrying that idiot makes me want to jump in the river. Open your damn dog eyes and look closely. I am Carlos." Veins popped on Carlos' forehead as he hoisted this puddle of mud up like a baby chick. "Look at you. Even the fish would think you're too stringy to eat if I tossed you in the river." Amidst this chaotic pulling and shoving, a gossip reporter hiding in the dark pressed the shutter. With a click, a bizarrely angled photo that would detonate citywide scandals as a loving embrace was captured. And Carlos, cursing into the cold wind as he tossed Derek into the back seat, probably never dreamed that he had actually found Derek's older brother and his own destined lover.
The story ends right here. As an honest, innocent alpha with a mind entirely occupied by farming and a simple country life, Arnold brings a uniquely down-to-earth, vibrant energy to the table. Faced with the towering Enigma Carlos, who boasts off-the-charts strength, he didn't back down for a second. Instead, driven by a raw, rustic sense of responsibility, he was dead set on providing for his wife. Carlos, on the other hand, played the manipulative mastermind to absolute perfection. Despite being a wealthy heir commanding sheer, inescapable domination, he deliberately put on a fragile, helpless act just to trap his man. This irresistible magnetism of a top predator masquerading as the prey, combined with their striking size difference, charged every single interaction with intense, palpable chemistry. The whole true love substitute misunderstanding later on is absolutely hilarious. Arnold's train of thought is just wildly unpredictable, completely blowing away any of the usual dramatic cliches. He mentally directed a whole soap opera about confronting a cheating spouse, only for it to end in total humiliation when he couldn't scrape together a cab fare. Even better, after the supposed substitute truth dropped, he relied on the stamina he built from years of racing wild boars in the fields to completely outrun a massive squad of bodyguards, only to end up running around the sprawling estate like a headless chicken because he got hopelessly lost. It is just too funny. No wonder Carlos fell for him. Honestly, who wouldn't love someone so incredibly pure, kind-hearted, and adorable?